I think I was a pretty good kid. I had a healthy respect for authority. I followed directions. I didn't break the rules very much. I don't know, you can ask my dad at dinner. I certainly wasn't a trouble child, which is perhaps why it's so disturbing for me to encounter the passage in this week's Torah portion, Ki Tetzei, about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward and defiant son. The Torah instructs, if a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or his mother and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of the town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And, as if the public shaming were not enough, the text continues, thereupon the men of his town shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. That's some heavy stuff. The parent of a rebellious child will bring that kid to the town square to be stoned. I guess I'm even more glad I was a good kid. If you're disturbed by this passage, and I heard some disturbance from that passage, you're in good company. The ancient rabbis seem to be as well. They go out of their way to place restrictions on this law to limit how often it might be used. They say it's his son, but it can't be a minor because he's not responsible for his actions, but it can't be an adult because he's not his parents' problem. So we're only talking about like a couple of years post-B'nai Mitzvah here. And it says son, so it can only apply to boys and not girls. So Sadie, you're off the hook. Natan, pay attention. But the rabbis go even further. They point out that twice the passage mentions both mother and father. The Talmud says this means that not only do both parents have to be in total agreement, but they need to have spoken to the son with the exact same words and even in the same tone of voice, lest he have received different messages. They even have to look the same height and appearance. They have to be identical, I guess. So Annie is shorter than me, so I guess we could never have a rebellious and defiant son. Also, we only have daughters. Maybe you're already doing the math in your head, but the existence of such a situation sounds highly improbable. In fact, the Talmud concludes there has never been a stubborn or rebellious son, and there never will be in the future. The rabbis have effectively defined Ben Sorer Umoreh out of existence. And yet, it's still there in our Torah for us to wrestle with. This terrible and terrifying idea that a kid might be so awful and irredeemable that the community would gather together to stone him. What kind of community would that be? Certainly not one I'd want to be a part of. But maybe the impossibility of it all is precisely the point. We are tempted to think of the world in categories of good and evil, right and wrong, redeemable and irredeemable. And there are, unfortunately, places we can look in the world and in our history to see such extremes. But they are few and far between. Almost no one is irredeemably evil. Certainly not you, certainly not me. Are we eternally good? No, not that either. We are somewhere in between. Every year we read Parshat Ki Tetzei in the Hebrew month of Elul, the time when we are starting to prepare ourselves for the work of the High Holy Days. I've always said that the High Holy Days are like a marathon. If you show up without having done any training, you're probably not going to finish. You might even pull something. Elul is our training season. The Jewish tradition says that we need a whole month of preparation if we are to accomplish what we need to during the 10 days of awe. We blow shofar every day of Elul, a single note ringing like a klaxon, an alarm clock blaring, announcing to our souls that it's time to begin the work. But what is that work? On the High Holy Days in the Ashamnu prayer, we will list our sins alphabetically from A to Z as we beat our chest. And you might be tempted to look at that list and think that you need a whole soul transformation, that you need, in the words of Glenda from Wicked, a personality dialysis. You might look at that list and feel momentarily like you are the wayward and defiant son, each strike of our chest hitting us like a stone. But here in Ki Teitse, we are reminded that unless your parents were identical twins, you are probably not their wayward son. You are at no risk of being stoned to death. As the rabbi said, there has never been and never will be a rebellious son like this. Ki Teitse contains 72 of the 613 commandments of the Torah, more than any other parsha. And Ben Sorer Umoreh is only one of them. Some deal with big things like the ethics of war and the treatment of runaway slaves. But many of them are much smaller. The Parsha tells us not to plow a field with an ox and a donkey bound together, or to make an ox wear a muzzle while it's grinding grain. We are told not to keep a day laborer's wages overnight, or to defraud customers with unfair weights and measures. And you'll hear tomorrow from our B'nai Mitzvah students who are, I should say, far from wayward or defiant. You'll hear from them about laws of returning lost objects and laws for ethically collecting eggs from a nest. It doesn't get much smaller than that. All of this comes bundled together to tell us that it is not only the big things that make up an ethical life, but also, and maybe primarily, the small things. Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah says, every person was endowed with free will. If they desire to bend themselves towards good and to be just, it is within their power and hand to reach out for it. And if they desire to bend themselves towards a bad path and be wicked, it is within the power of their hand to reach out for it. This is the purpose of these seemingly tiny laws. They bend us towards the way of light, little by little. There is a law in Ki Teitse that says, when you reap the harvests of your field, if you overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the orphan, the widow. Even the things we drop, even the opportunities we forget, are chances for spiritual growth. Everywhere, there are opportunities to bend towards the right. There's an old proverb, how do you eat an elephant? Anyone? How do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite. One bite at a time. The big work of soul transformation can feel gargantuan and impossible. How can I ever become the person I wish to be? I try so hard year after year, and yet I keep coming back here, barely having made any progress. The Parsha reminds us to focus not on the slowness of our speed, but on the small steps, the tiny bites, to acknowledge that we have made progress along the way. For the last 12 or so years, I've been using this website, every High Holy Days, called 10Q. It's one of my favorite spiritual practices of the season. Each day for the 10 days of awe, it emails me a question, and I go on to the site and write my answer. And then at the end of the High Holy Days, I submit all my answers to the vault, and they save them, and I can't look at them until just before Rosh Hashanah next year. The questions are the same every year. And because I've been doing this for over a decade now, when the vault opens the week before Rosh Hashanah, I can flip back through all my previous answers. It feels to me a little bit like the marks on the wall of Annie's Family Cottage, where we come back year after year to mark our children's growth. Through my answers, I can plot my own growth. I highly recommend to you that you check out this website. It's free. Go to doyou10q.com. They don't pay me. But I've noticed the last few years that I've had this one big New Year's resolution that has appeared year after year. I don't think I've made any progress towards it. Admittedly, it's a big goal, but seeing that on the list reminds me every year, it makes me feel defeated, which is exactly the opposite, I hope, of the goal of 10Q. So the challenge I'm giving myself this year is to try and read through last year's answers and notice all the places where I have made progress and all the ways I've grown, small as they may be. And I'll put this one resolution back on the list for next year, but it's an elephantine task, and I have lots else to be proud of and lots else to work on. Smaller, more achievable goals that point me towards the big changes I seek. The Hasidic master, known as the Kotzker Rebbe, was asked what it means to be a chassid, or a person of faith. He answered, "Arbeiten auf sich," to work on yourself. This is the season where the work begins, even though it's work that never truly ended. We begin to remind ourselves that we are not as bad as we sometimes feel, just as we are not as good as we could be. We are not wayward. We need not be defiant. We are always leaning one direction or the other. Like a flower that turns towards the sun, our job in this season is to reorient ourselves towards good, towards light. We start by acknowledging where we've missed along the way, the moments where we leaned the wrong way. Our tradition offers us a small practice, all these small practices that might lead us to become, bit by bit and bite by bite, the person we aim to be. May the sound of the shofar this Elul wake us up to the soulful, hopeful, joyful spiritual work that lies ahead. Shabbat Shalom.